as he doubles down on his warnings to Kim Jong-un to stop threatening the United States and its allies. Mr. Trump saying just this morning, America's military solutions are in place. And today, he's meeting with Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster, as well as UN Ambassador Nikki Haley. This is Outnumbered. I'm Sandra Smith, and here today from the Fox Business Network, Dagan McDowell. Also from FBN, anchor of the Intelligence Report, Trish Regan. Former National Security Staffer under President Bush and Obama, Jillian Turner. And today's hashtag One Lucky Guy. Iraq and Afghanistan veteran and Fox News contributor Pete Hegseth is here, and he is outnumbered, and you made it by the hair of your chinny chin chin. You were filling in for Mr. Kilmeade up in radio. You were just with me on his radio program. We had so much fun. Yeah. So I'm glad to be here. Barely made it. But I know that you are so fired up about what is happening right now.
I called you hunky in the tease, by the way. I know you missed it.
I
really appreciate that. You're embarrassing.
All right, let's get started. One of these days. President Trump, doubling down on his threat to unleash fire and fury in North Korea, continues to threaten the U.S. after Pyongyang announced possible plans to launch missiles toward the U.S. territory of Guam. Was asking the president if his initial tone was too harsh. Listen.
Frankly, the people that were questioning that statement, was it too tough? Maybe it wasn't tough enough. If North Korea does anything in terms of even thinking about attack of anybody that we love or we represent or our allies or us, they can be very, very nervous. I'll tell you what, and they should be very nervous, because things will happen to them like they never thought possible, okay?
And this morning, President Trump tweeting this: military solutions are now fully in place, locked and loaded, should North Korea act unwisely. Hopefully, Kim Jong-un will find another path. North Korea's state news agency saying today Trump is driving the situation to, quote, the brink of a nuclear war. Meantime, Defense Secretary James Mattis telling reporters diplomacy is the way forward.
The American effort is diplomatically led, it has diplomatic traction, it is gaining diplomatic results. And I want to stay right there, right now. The tragedy of war is well enough known. It doesn't need another characterization beyond the fact that it would be catastrophic.
First, the rhetoric from the president, fire and fury. Then he says those words may not have been tough enough.
Then he says locked and loaded. This is a guy who understands tough talk is what's needed right now. You need the credible threat of military force, which we never had under Barack Obama and have barely had ever in North Korea. So we've diplomated, we've sanctioned, we've UN regulationed our way to a nuclear bomb where now we're under threat on our own shore. Play this forward 20 years. In 20 years, we could face perpetual blackmail from the Korean Peninsula. Not a couple missiles, not a dozen, hundreds of missiles, miniaturized nuclear weapons pointed at our cities, undermining our ability to operate in that region or around the globe. And the same could happen in Iran. This is a put up or shut up moment. This is a serious president with serious people around him. His instincts are right. Soft talk has not worked. Strength is the only one that's going to work. We've done nothing but bad deals in that area. It's time to force the North Korean regime and China, who he's also speaking to, by the way, most importantly, to come to the table and stop it now.
So he's doubled down on the tough talk, but then there's concern about this mixed messaging that may or may not be coming out of the White House, with Defense Secretary Mattis, as you just heard, saying we want to use diplomacy, saying a potential nuclear confrontation with North Korea would be catastrophic. Are the messages mixed coming out of this White House?
I don't think the messages are mixed, meaning they're not contradicting one another. I think that Secretary Mattis naturally has a much more measured way of speaking than President Trump. That's just, they have very different rhetorical styles, but I think they're synced up on policy underneath that. And I think that, by the way, I was saying this to Pete yesterday on the Business Channel, that President Trump's approach so far, in my opinion, is not hugely divergent from President Obama. What we've got is, since basically the policy has not changed that much.
Except the credible use of military force.
Well, but Pete, to correct you though, on earlier, President Obama increased the American troop presence in South Korea.
Never a credible threat of military force.
But he increased the number of American troops in South Korea. So how can you say that there was no
first strike capability? We weren't going to do a land
credible military force.
We weren't going to do a land invasion into North Korea. It's the credible use of a first strike capability. But
that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about having the threat be visible to the North Korea be immediate, having the threat be in close proximity. How else do you convey that aside from having military there?
All right. Well, there is one group taking issue with the rhetoric coming out of the White House, Dagan, and that there is an excerpt that we have from this letter signed by 64 House Dems condemning his language, urging Rex Tillerson to rein in that rhetoric, saying this in the letter: these statements are irresponsible and dangerous, and also senselessly provide a boon to domestic North Korean propaganda. We respectfully but firmly urge you to do everything in your power to ensure that President Trump and other administration officials understand the importance of speaking and acting with the utmost caution and restraint on this delicate issue.
Caution and restraint have not worked. What do they want? Warm and fuzzy. Come on over here and let me give you a big hug kind of language. This is communist-style language that should resonate with the Kim regime. And even President Clinton back in 1994 discussed or thought about at least the threat of military action and was really talked away by President Jimmy Carter. And then we put in place something that had no checks and balances in terms of what the North Korea was allowed to do. There are a lot of things at issue. We have diplomacy. We have at least signals from the president and his advisors that we are at the ready to shoot down missiles. We are at the ready with military presence, but there's so many other things we can do. The CIA, Mike Pompeo has been talking for weeks about preparing for the North Korea threat, including covert operations in the country potentially. We can up our missile defenses. The Trump budget actually reduces the funding for missile defense systems in this country. Anti-proliferation dragnets, which the Bush administration used, where we would actually board ships if we think that they're carrying nuclear material. There's so much that we can do, and so much that's being talked about.
And as far as further sanctions, which we've talked a lot about on this couch, and we talked about it this morning, Pete, Colonel Oliver North was on Fox News earlier saying the problem with sanctions, they take too darn long.
I know. I mean, you know what? We should have sanctioned the heck out of North Korea a long time ago. We should have sanctioned the heck out of China, and we still should. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity. This is low-hanging fruit we're talking about. We sanctioned one bank from China recently, but there's a whole lot more that are doing business here, and we should be going after China hard to demand that they play ball on North Korea. As far as the rhetoric goes, this is a crazy man. He might as well know that we can do what we say we do in terms of the rhetoric itself. There is nothing wrong with conveying what we have. Lord knows we don't want to get to that state. But if he doesn't know that we're serious, then he will not take us seriously. And this has been the whole problem with the last administration. That's right. And that's why doubling down on sanctions at this point, while it may help bring China along, isn't going to solve whether he pursues or ultimately. He already has them, but how many miniaturized nukes he gets. The lesson that dictators take is that if you give up your nukes, you die in a ditch, stabbed by your own people, like Muammar Gaddafi. He gave up his nukes after the Iraq War, and that's what happened to him. They believe the pursuit of those will preserve their regime, which is why stopping them before they get them or can produce, proliferate them is so critically important. And again, I go back to Iran, because Iran is even worse. It's an ideologically dedicated place that said they wanted to wipe Israel off the map. They're collaborating with North Korea to get these very same weapons. Imagine when we're under perpetual blackmail from these two states, an axis of evil that we haven't understood.
We're talking about preventing countries like North Korea from development is OBE now. I don't know why we even talk about that. I get that it's important to talk about whose fault all of this may be.
Then, and how bad it would be.
I agree 100%. But I think that it's more important to look at what's on the table right now, because that's what President Trump's looking at. And I think he's exercising his own this is his own version of amped up strategic deterrence. He's not changing the policy so much because he's kind of maneuvered that as much as he can right now without launching a ground invasion inside North Korea. So what he's doing is amping up the rhetoric. But I think it's important.
Is it important?
That's a stylistic difference. It's not a policy.
So do you agree with Susan Rice, who wrote in the New York Times yesterday that we need to tolerate nuclear weapons in North Korea? That's just the way it's going to be? We got to deal with it forever?
I never said anything even remotely like that.
No, but that's effectively what you're saying. Is that
no, it's not. It's absolutely not.
Okay, so clarify your comments then.
All I'm saying is that everybody's making a big deal as if President Trump's stance on this issue is tremendously divergent from presidents that have come before him. And I'm simply pointing out that if you look at what's on the ground, it's actually not. He's changing the rhetoric. He's not actually doing anything differently than, say, what President Obama did right now.
Sanctions
That's my point. I'm not saying we need to tolerate North Korea as a nuclear state.
The sanctions at the United Nations over the weekend, although they did not go far enough, $1 billion out of $3 billion in exports coming out of North Korea, the fact that China and Russia signed on to those is the very reason that you're seeing so much jawboning from Kim Jong-un at this point. The fact that they sanctioned that small bank, the Bank of Dandong, in late June, it was kind of overlooked by a lot of the media before the missile, Kim firing the missiles in July. But that's a big step because it signals that more is to come.
If you make these threats, and we're making these threats now, do you run a situation where you may have this red line? We all remember that well. And if you don't, I mean, the challenge, I think, with rhetoric, and this is perhaps why other presidents haven't used this, and I hear your point that the policy necessarily hasn't changed, but now that you're out there saying these things, what does that mean if he decides to go and lob those things into the water off Guam?
That's where President Trump has been so responsible, where Obama was so reckless. He isn't setting red lines. He's been very careful not to say this is the exact trigger point, because that's when you force yourself, you back yourself into a corner where you got to do something you don't want to do, or you look foolish like Obama did in Syria by setting that red line and then not enforcing it.
Here's the problem.
So President Trump's taking a very responsible approach, and brinksmanship is part of how you get a good outcome, which is exactly what he's doing right now.
Really quickly, here's a problem with our missile interceptors. Broadly speaking, they're called mid-course ground-based intercepts. We have mixed success with those, about a 50% success rate over their lifetime. So if you shoot missiles and we don't get all of them, then what?
All right, we've got to leave it there. More on this coming up as tensions escalate. China's state media warning North Korea and the U.S. not to play with fire. But President Trump calling out Beijing, saying it must do more to rein in its nuclear neighbor. Whether the U.S. can truly pressure China for help. Plus, President Trump now suggesting Mitch McConnell should step down if he fails to deliver on key agenda items. Good way to hold him accountable, or is he alienating a key ally? We will debate.
I think China will do a lot more. Look, we have trade with China. We lose hundreds of billions of dollars a year on trade with China. They know how I feel. It's not going to continue like that. But if China helps us, I feel a lot differently toward trade. A lot differently toward trade.
That was President Trump yesterday, stepping up pressure on China to do more to help resolve the standoff in North Korea. But Beijing says both countries shouldn't play with fire, and also suggesting it will block any preemptive attacks on North Korea. The Global Times, a Chinese state-run newspaper, writing, quote, China should also make clear that if North Korea launches missiles that threaten U.S. soil first and the U.S. China will stay neutral. If the U.S. and South Korea carry out strikes and try to overthrow the North Korean regime and change the political pattern of the Korean peninsula, China will prevent them from doing so. Meantime, a Chinese foreign ministry spokesman today calling the situation complex, but urging both sides to take steps to de-escalate the situation. All right, so let's start here with China. What is China's role in all of this?
It's substantial. I actually think you have to escalate before you de-escalate. Escalate sufficiently to create a crisis moment, brinksmanship, where they have to come to the table based on shared interests. They want to agitate with North Korea, but they don't want to create such an agitation that the regime is overthrown or America gains more of a foothold on that peninsula. Where is that rub? Where does that point meet? I'm not quite sure. That's for the experts in the White House to determine. But you have to push that envelope, because China, they're not interested in our interests. They're also not our friends. They have their own ambitions regionally, in their hemisphere, and globally. They look toward a long future where they're ascendant and America is descendant. That is the view of the Chinese leadership right now over a 50-year perspective. They're building islands. They're projecting power. This is part of that game that they're playing. And being decisive with them, standing strong, using trade as a lever is going to be key.
Dagan appears in agreement. Jillian's trying to jump in. Dagan, to you first.
No, I was just going to add that China hopes that the North Korea threat drives us out of Northeast Asia. And there is so much more that we can do in terms of putting financial pressure on China and on North Korea. What the UN sanctions over the weekend did not do, they did not cut the supply of oil and refined oil products, gasoline, into North Korea from China. Yeah. The export of slave labor that sends money back to the Hermit Kingdom. And then in terms of the secondary sanctions, you start cracking down, as Trish was talking about in the last block, you start cracking down on financial institutions, any companies that are propping up the missile and nuclear programs in China. You make it hurt. You make China hurt in their pocketbook, and it could affect.
So did you hear what he said? That was very interesting. He said, look, you know, we have to go after China on a lot of these issues, i.e. trade, etc. But, you know, maybe I'll back off is essentially what he was saying. If they cooperate on North Korea, you think about China, they are stealing from American companies hundreds of billions of dollars worth of intellectual property. They're counterfeiting goods. I mean, they are just a source for counterfeit goods, unlike any other. And this is costing American businesses. And it's a big issue because not only that, you run the risk as a foreign company doing business in China that your executives can be jailed for really drummed up charges. So there are a lot of issues with China. We need to start addressing these. And that is, I suppose, our leverage, Dagan, right? That is the threat that we have. We can actually start going after them on all of these economic issues, but we haven't done it, Jillian. I'm not sure why.
Well, I think part of the reason, and Pete touched on it a moment ago too, part of the reason is that we share with North Korea a common interest in having a nuclear-free. We share with China an interest in having a nuclear-free North Korea, but that is a relationship based on convenience and only goes up to a point, and then we sharply diverge. So our national security interests in this are much stronger than China's, because China, remember, is a neighbor and looks to North Korea for major trade, major investment, props them up. They have a vested interest in seeing North Korea's economy remain strong, remain stable, and remain independent. The North Korean economy collapsing would prevent a major, major crisis for China. For us, not so much.
So should President Trump be trying to convince China to do more to address this threat?
Well, he has been, and I think every American president comes into office and they think, okay, I'm going to hit China really hard. I'm going to go down that path as far as I can, and maybe I'll be the one to turn it, and they're not. And it's because, again, our interests, our national security interests, get to a certain point and then sharply diverge. And I don't know how we're ever going to overcome that.
And financially and economically, we don't have as much leverage over China as some people think. One, because we do rely on imported goods from China to keep, because people love cheap goods that they buy at discount stores, number one. I don't mean to sound simplistic about this. And also, China being the second largest foreign holder of our debt, because we are a debtor nation, we rely on them to not only continue to buy U.S. treasuries, but to not sell what they own to keep interest rates down.
They're our banker, and yet simultaneously, China needs us to do well because they need that debt to actually get repaid.
Yeah. All right, we got to leave it there.
And need someone to sell to.
And as the tensions continue to mount with North Korea, a must-see interview this weekend. Chris Wallace will talk to CIA Director Mike Pompeo on Fox News Sunday. Check your local listings for channel and time on the Fox Broadcast Network, and you can catch it Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern right here on FNC. Well, the growing showdown between President Trump and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, and what it means for the president's stalled agenda on Capitol Hill. Plus, two of President Trump's biggest Republican critics in the Senate now facing primary challengers. Should other Trump critics be worried? And is it time for more Republicans to support the president? We debate.
I'll tell you what, if he doesn't get repeal and replace done, and if he doesn't get taxes done, meaning cuts and reform, and if he doesn't get a very easy one to get done, infrastructure, if he doesn't get them done, then you can ask me that question. But I said, Mitch, get to work and let's get it done. They should have had this last one done. They lost by one vote. For a thing like that to happen is a disgrace.
I said Mitch. Some are defending this Senate's top Republican. Orrin Hatch's office tweeting this from the senator. Senate Majority Leader McConnell has been the best leader we've had in my time in the Senate through very tough challenges. I fully support him. And when it comes to whose side the American people are on, a new poll shows that they think the president is doing a better job than Congress is. Even at 38%, he is up 18 points over Congress's overall approval rating of just 20%. Newt Gingrich has said, not just this morning on Maria Bartiromo's show, but in other interviews, he's encouraging the president, and he's an ally of the president and is a huge supporter of him. But he's encouraging the president to read Mitch McConnell's book, The Long Game, and McConnell is not going anywhere, and they basically need to make nice.
Well, maybe that is eventually where it needs to go, but if it's such a long game that we're all dead by the time it succeeds, then it's too long of a game. And
now,
it's not
listen,
worth
I
it.
agree.
Listen, I mean, losing is losing, failing is failing. Trying doesn't count. So Orrin Hatch can say he's the best majority leader ever. By what standard? By the fact that they passed a bunch of show votes when they weren't in charge, and now they are in charge and they can't get anything done? I'll give him credit for Neil Gorsuch, but that was also a good pick by this president. There's not very few grassroots conservatives out there that lay the failures in Washington so far at the feet of Donald Trump. They lay them at the feet of establishment Republicans, whether it's Susan Collins or Lisa Murkowski or Ben Sass or all these guys who are out there crowing about Trump rather than getting in line behind somebody who wants to pass conservative ideas and do what they said they want to do. I don't get it.
I want to ask Trish about this because my theory is the market is not selling off on the North Korea rhetoric. Now, we've got a little bit of a bounce back in the market today, but worst week maybe since the end of March. It's because you have this tension between Trump and McConnell, and the agenda is at risk. We're talking about raising the debt ceiling next month, keeping the government open, getting a budget in place just to even lay the groundwork for tax reform.
But that tension's been there. The risks are increasing with North Korea.
Not this week. You have Mitch McConnell taking a shot at Donald Trump and Donald Trump taking shots back at Mitch McConnell.
You know, it's a combination, perhaps, of all of the above. I think as far as geopolitical risk, typically, and it's hard to know in these situations, but typically the markets have always bounced back from that. I mean, you look at this over, and yes, problems before the market goes down always comes back. So there might be real fear of corporate tax. That's going to, and so what of this, that, North Korea, Mitch McConnell, etc. How much is all of this going to interfere with the tax reform that investors so
with that rhetoric
want?
with Mitch McConnell and fellow Republicans, does the president risk alienate those that he needs? I mean, that is a real risk, not getting tax reform done by the end of the year.
And is it smart? Because from where I sit, I feel like I'm missing something. Because isn't Mitch McConnell one of the only Republicans, certainly in a leadership position, that has stood by the president, has been on board with him since the campaign?
But the president has made that very clear that does not stop him from being critical.
What he said the other day,
he's not leading,
was barely a criticism of the president. I mean, it was the first time I have heard Mitch McConnell say anything that went contrary to what the president has been saying. I mean, he has been right there with him every step of the way on the agenda. He said himself, I agree with the president's goals on health care.
The excessive expectations
my question is it smart for the president, if we're looking strategy, is it smart for him to try and potentially throw Mitch McConnell under the bus?
It's for him to say that winning matters and we should double down on doing what we said we're going to do. If the Republican Party, we had Kevin Brady on the radio, he's releasing a plan to put your taxes on a postcard. If the Republican Party can't do tax reform, and they can't do Obama repeal and replace, then they might as well just
disband the Republican Party. You're getting ahead of yourself.
Disband it. They ran on this.
You're getting your head of yourself. You have to keep the government open and avoid a debt default by the end of the month. I'll predict this. This ain't getting done this year. This is a disaster. And by the way, to call Mitch McConnell a leader is a misnomer because he's not leading. He's had 7 years.
Right.
7 years.
It's very frustrating. Meantime,
I'm serious.
Some key members of a major pro-Trump group now joining the campaign for one of the primary challengers to Arizona Senator Jeff Flake. This, according to The Hill, which reports that President Trump's allies are ramping up their own efforts there to take down the Arizona Republican who has emerged as one of the president's vocal critics on Capitol Hill. And another Republican critic of the president, Senator Dean Heller from Nevada, is also facing a 2018 primary challenger. Meantime, the head of the RNC this week warning Republicans that their seats are in danger if they oppose President Trump, pointing to what happened in the 2016 election.
You look at 2016, the senators that did not support the president, and let's look at Joe Heck and Kelly Ayotte, they fell short in those Senate races.
Yeah.
And so there is a cautionary tale there, which is voters want you to support the president and his agenda.
You know, voters are certainly frustrated. They see all this dysfunction in Washington. One of the reasons they sent him there was to be that disruptor in chief. When you look at examples like Kelly Ayotte in New Hampshire, and she kind of flip-flopped. She was for him, she was against him, she was for him, she was against him. That did not serve her well. But it's symptomatic, I think, of a lot of people, Dagan, that we see in the party right now. They don't quite know what to make of him, and it's hard for them to jump with both feet in when they're not certain of how they're going to be looked upon by the media, by their peers, and ultimately voters.
Oh, so it's all ultimately self-interested. That's what you're telling me for these guys. But they ran as these principled, courageous conservatives that were going to go to Washington and take it all back.
If they were really self-interested, they would actually be more in his corner. But I think it's hard for them to think. I mean, think about the way he campaigned and how awkward it made some people feel. They're not used to this. They've never seen anything like this. So, Dagan, it's hard for them to say, okay, yeah, we're going to back this guy when they're not certain of what the ramifications will be.
I think that as evidence of what Trump supporters are capable of, you look at the ads that the pro-Trump group America First Policy started running against Dean Heller when it looked like Dean Heller in Nevada, who's up for re-election next year, wasn't going to get on board with the health care reform. They started running anti-Dean Heller ads, and they had more as like a 7-figure budget in place, and they pretty quickly pulled them once Dean Heller decided to come back to the table to negotiate with colleagues on that Senate bill. So that's effective. So I think that any Republicans out there who think that this might be a bluff maybe need to think again.
So do they need to get it, basically? Do they need to say, okay, he is our president, he's popular, this will help me if I support him?
I have to defer my time to Jillian because she's been sitting there with this really strange look on her face.
No, I'm just thinking that the cannibalism doesn't help anybody in the party, right? I mean, these divisions that are showing up, this GOP civil war, as people are now calling it, who does that serve?
It doesn't
serve the president. It doesn't serve the Congress, though I did notice that according to our Fox stats at the beginning of the last block, they're up like 10 percentage points in popularity since last year. So good on Congress. They're up from like 10 to 20%.
But still lower than the president.
Yeah, still horrendously low.
What doesn't help is when you have Republicans like Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski who run against Obamacare, and then they vote with Democrats as much as they vote with Republicans.
So does this unity serve them in some political...
What does it serve a guy like Jeff Flake running around the country talking about how terrible President Trump is as a conservative Republican? They're the ones shooting inside the tent. This president wants to do all the things they said they wanted to do on the campaign trail. Yet because he's a little bit different, he's outside the box, he speaks differently, they can't get behind him. Like, pull on your big boy pants and join the Republican Party and get something done.
With Obamacare repeal and replace, the president said, for better or worse, just have at it, do what you've been working on for the last 7 years, and I'll sign whatever you put in front of me, and they still can't get it done. You talk about eating each other. The problem is President Trump, when he was running for even the nomination, he gobbled up Republicans right and left like M&Ms, Little Marco, Lion Ted, Low Energy Jeff. He decimated, I mean, he destroyed the party, and they resent it, and I think that resentment is...
on your big boy pants.
That's what's bubbling up to the surface now.
Yep. Still to come on Outnumbered today, the FBI's raid of Paul Manafort's home, what the president has to say about the special counsel's focus on the former campaign chairman, and what he says about reports that he's considering firing Robert Mueller.
Has no intention of firing Robert Mueller as special counsel for the probe into Russian election meddling, despite repeatedly calling the investigation a witch hunt. Listen.
I haven't given it any thought. I mean, I've been reading about it from you people. You say, oh, I'm going to dismiss them. No, I'm not dismissing anybody. I mean, I want them to get on with the task, but I also want the Senate and the House to come out with their findings. There is no collusion. You know why? Because I don't speak to Russians. Look, I won because I suppose I was a much better candidate than her. I won because I went to Wisconsin. I went to Michigan. I won Pennsylvania. I fought a smart battle. That's why I win. I didn't win because of Russia. Russia had nothing to do with me winning.
This, as Politico is reporting, federal investigators are trying to rattle Trump's former campaign manager, Paul Manafort, going after his son-in-law to help increase the pressure with a pre-dawn raid of his home last month. The president touched on this, saying he was surprised by the FBI's tactics.
I've always found Paul Manafort to be a very decent man. And he's like a lot of other people, probably makes consultant fees from all over the place. Who knows? I don't know. But I thought that was a very, that was pretty tough stuff.
Mr. President,
to wake him up, perhaps his family was there. I think that's pretty tough stuff.
Meanwhile, the president's lawyer, John Dowd, blasting the Mueller team's tactics in an email to the Wall Street Journal, saying, quote, these methods are normally found and employed